In the middle of the Gobi Desert, the ground shakes, the dunes tremble, and locals swear it's a giant worm moving underneath, and entire expeditions went after it. Except what these explorers found wasn't a monster. It was something far stranger, involving fossils, unexplained phenomena, and an obsession that spanned decades. Stick with me until the end, because we're starting in 1990 with four Czechs trying to lure the creature with vibration, and what happened, nobody was ready for. Let's go. In 1990, four Czech explorers got it into their heads that they were going to solve one of the greatest mysteries of the Gobi Desert, finding the legendary Mongolian deathworm. They didn't go in with shovels and picks. No, they brought equipment that emitted vibrations into the ground, a kind of seismic call, hoping the creature would react and show itself. Think about it. It's like trying to catch a shark by smacking the water with a broomstick. The logic was, if the worm senses vibration, it'll come. Spoiler, it didn't come. The expedition crossed miles of dunes under a sun that topped 50 degrees Celsius, with wind carrying fine sand into every piece of equipment, every crevice, every lungful of air. They set up camp at strategic points, activated the ground vibrator, and waited. Hours. Days. Nothing moved except the sand pushed by the wind. The desert, which in the local stories seemed alive, full of hidden creatures, showed itself completely indifferent to the presence of those four maniacs with their ground-shaking machine. And here's the detail nobody expected. The expedition didn't come back empty-handed. They didn't bring back the worm, of course, but they returned with records, accounts from nomadic herders, and coordinates that would fuel other explorers' obsession for more than a decade. Because the question that kept echoing wasn't, does the worm exist, but rather, if it's not the worm, what are the locals seeing? And it's exactly that question that would drive the next wave of expeditions, with people from the United States, the United Kingdom, and New Zealand joining in. But I'll get to that. After the Czechs, researcher Ivan Mackerel entered the picture, dedicating years of his life to hunting the death worm like someone chasing a ghost with GPS. He organized expeditions to the Gobi in 1992, 2000, and 2004, each one with more equipment, more funding, and more hope of finally laying eyes on the creature. Alongside him, groups from the United States, the United Kingdom, and New Zealand also ventured into the dunes, mounting operations that looked more like military missions than a search for a worm. And look, there was no shortage of technology. Thermal cameras, vibration sensors, rudimentary drones, interviews with dozens of nomads, and sweeps of areas where the stories pointed to sightings. But the result was always the same: silence, sand, and wind. No photo, no tracks, no fragment of skin, nothing that science could put on a table and say, look, this is it. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack, except the haystack stretches over 800 miles, and the needle supposedly burrows meters underground. And every expedition that came back empty-handed, instead of killing the legend, only made it grow bigger. Because the lack of proof became fuel. Oh, it's because it hides, it's because it's rare, it's because you didn't search right. And while Western explorers kept insisting on technology, the answer to this obsession might have been hiding in something much older than any thermal sensor. The stories told around campfires, passed down from generation to generation. And that's exactly where we need to go back in time, to 1926, when an American explorer first heard these accounts and carried the mystery to the rest of the world. Come with me back to 1926. Explorer and paleontologist Roy Chapman Andrews from the American Museum of Natural History is in the middle of the Gobi Desert leading an expedition in search of fossils. Between one dig and another, the local residents start telling him stories about a creature that lives buried in the dunes, the Algakakoi, which in Mongolian literally means intestine worm. Andrews never saw the creature, of course, but he recorded everything in a book called The Trail of Ancient Man, And it was that record that planted the seed of the mystery in the Western imagination. Think about the weight of that. Up until that moment, the worm was just a story told by nomadic herders, shared in yurts around the fire, passed from father to son. The moment an American scientist puts it in a book published in New York, the narrative shifts to a whole new level. It stops being local folklore and becomes an international cryptozoological mystery. It's like that story your grandfather used to tell on the porch that suddenly goes viral on the internet. Everyone wants to investigate. The core of it stays the same, but the scale explodes. And here's the curious part. Andrews himself never fully believed it. He recorded it, described it, but treated it as a cultural account, not as biological evidence. The problem was the train had already left the station. In the decades that followed, descriptions of the worm began to multiply, with each storyteller adding a new detail, a new power, a new size. And it's exactly this avalanche of different versions that will make science scratch its head and ask, wait, what exactly are we even talking about here? Now pay attention to this detail because it's crucial. If you ask 10 different Gobi residents to describe the worm, you'll get 10 completely different creatures. One says it's half a meter long, another swears it's over 2 meters. One says it's bright red, another describes it as yellowish, covered in scales, or smooth like a gut. Some accounts say it spits venom, others say it releases an electric shock capable of killing from a distance, and there are even those who claim it simply looks at you and you drop dead. See the problem? There's no pattern. There's no consistent description that repeats with concrete details from village to village. It's as if every generation took their grandfather's story and added a new twist. No, my grandfather's worm was big, but the one I saw was huge and it glowed in the dark. And the more supernatural the ability attributed to the creature, the further it drifts from biology and into the territory of pure myth, the kind of legend that exists to explain the fear of the desert. And that's where science raises an eyebrow and says, okay, if nobody can agree on size, color, shape, or behavior, maybe we're not looking for an animal. Maybe we're looking for an idea. But before dismissing it all as fantasy, it's worth looking at it from another angle. What if these reports, exaggerated as they may be, were born from something real that these people saw and simply couldn't identify? Because there is, in fact, a biological candidate that could have inspired much of these stories, and it was found right there, in the heart of the Gobi. Here's where things get interesting. Researchers who studied the Algoy-Kirkoi accounts noticed that many of the descriptions match a very real animal, the Eryx snake, a dwarf sand boa that lives buried in the sand of the Gobi. It's thick, cylindrical, reddish, moves beneath the surface, and when threatened, coils up in a way that, to someone catching a glimpse through the dust, can look much bigger than it actually is. Add to that natural fear distance, the heat distorting your vision, and there you go. A 16-inch snake becomes a 6-foot monster in the memory of whoever retells the story afterward. And there's another linguistic detail that changes everything. The word worm, in Old English and its equivalents in several other languages, didn't always mean earthworm or larva. Historically, worm was used to describe any elongated, crawling creature, including snakes, lizards, and even eels. It's the same root as wyvern, for example. So when the nomads said worm, they might simply have meant that which crawls and hides, without necessarily describing a giant invertebrate with supernatural powers. In other words, the legend may have been born from a real animal, amplified by fear, by oral tradition, and by a translation that carried more weight than it should have. But what if I told you that, while everyone was looking at the ground searching for a worm, the Gobi was hiding something infinitely more impressive, something that rewrote the history of life on Earth? Because the real monsters of that desert had already been found, just millions of years old. While the explorers were tearing through the dunes chasing a worm, Paleontologists working in that same region were digging up something that made any monster look like small potatoes. The Gobi is, to this day, one of the biggest dinosaur graveyards on the planet. We're talking about thousands of preserved fossils, complete skeletons, nests with eggs, babies still inside the shell. Roy Chapman Andrews himself, remember him? Was the one who discovered, in 1923, the first dinosaur eggs ever found in history. Not a 2-meter worm. Dinosaur eggs. And the list doesn't stop there. It was in the Gobi that they found the famous velociraptor locked in combat with a protoceratops, frozen in a fight that lasted 70 million years until someone dug it up. Species like Tarbosaurus, the Asian cousin of T-Rex, and the bizarre Therizinosaurus, with claws nearly a meter long, were identified there. Real monsters, just made of bones and carbon dating instead of legend. Every expedition that went to the Gobi chasing the worm ended up coming back, without even meaning to, with fragments that helped piece together the puzzle of the Mesozoic era. The desert handed out fossils like party favors. And that's when the irony hits you. The legendary creature never showed up, but real creatures, 80 million years old, were there the whole time, waiting for someone to look at the ground and ask the right question. But the Gobi still has one last card up its sleeve, a phenomenon that has nothing to do with bones or worms, but that makes any scientist's hair stand on end. Because on certain nights, when the wind stops and silence takes over, the dunes themselves start to sing. And no one can quite explain why. Now forget the worm, forget the fossils. Picture the scene. You're in the Gobi at dusk. The wind dies down, the silence is absolute, and suddenly a deep, almost musical hum starts rising out of the sand, as if the dune itself had an internal organ playing a sustained note. This is real. The so-called singing dunes of the Gobi produce sounds that can reach up to 105 decibels, louder than a jackhammer, and they've been recorded by explorers, scientists, and even film crews. It's not a legend, it's not wind hitting rock. It's the sand itself generating sound, and that happens in very few places on Earth. The explanation science has come up with so far involves a very specific combination of factors. The grains need to be extremely dry, perfectly rounded, and uniform in size. When an avalanche of sand slides down the face of the dune, those grains move in sync, creating a collective vibration that gets amplified in a compacted layer just below the surface, acting like a natural resonance chamber. It's as if the dune were a giant musical instrument. The grains are the strings, the compacted layer is the guitar's body, and gravity is the hand strumming it. And the most fascinating part is that, even with all of today's technology, researchers still can't reproduce the phenomenon in a lab with the same intensity and duration as it happens in the desert. In other words, the Gobi didn't need a giant worm to be mysterious. It already sings on its own, already holds the bones of titans, and already swallows entire expeditions whole with its sheer vastness. And maybe that's exactly what keeps drawing people there, decade after decade, not the certainty of finding an answer, but the impossibility of ignoring the question. We went in looking for a worm and came out with dinosaurs, snakes disguised as monsters, and dunes that sing. If that doesn't make you want to dig into the next mystery, nothing will. So tell me in the comments, would you still go after the worm, or would you change your target? I want to know. If this video hooked you, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and send it to that friend who's obsessed with mysteries, because next week there's more, and I don't want you missing out. Cheers.